Qualifying for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix is over, and it was almost Carlos Sainz in the Williams on pole position. But at the last moment, Max Verstappen in the Red Bull came through and took pole position by quite some margin. But what did we learn? Well, in today's video I'm going to be taking a look at the data and doing a data analysis from a very hectic qualifying session. If you enjoyed the video, then please hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. And when you're done with this video, please check out Crash Happy, which is a podcast featuring myself, Formula Duck, Dan No Skill, Not Applicable, and Mr. V. Episode 3 can be found in the description below. But now, let's get into the video. As usual, I'll be talking about the top teams later on, so please do stick around for that. Yep, qualifying in Azerbaijan is over, and it was a crazy session where there was a record-breaking 6 red flags. Firstly, Alex Albon hit the wall, and then it was Nico Hulkenberg's turn. After that, Colapinto caused number 3 after hitting the wall while Pierre Gasly was recovering back to the circuit. That was all in Q1. Then in Q2, Oliver Bearman caused a red flag, and well, that was it for Q2. But going into Q3, Charles Leclerc caused a red flag, and then finally Oscar Piastri caused the final red flag of the day. In my preview video, I said how Piastri and Charles Leclerc historically have been very strong at Baku, and well, it was nice of them to both make me look silly by putting in the wall during Q3. After all of that though, it was pole position for Max Verstappen, but it was almost Carlos Sainz on pole position, and also Liam Lawson is P3 in the Racing Bulls, which kind of shows just how manic this qualifying session was. Where were McLaren? Well, I will get onto them later on. But now let's take a look at the top speeds that all of the teams reached, and what can we see here? Well, what we can see is actually rather surprising. Usually the fastest cars in a straight line are either Williams or Sauber, but this weekend, Williams are by quite some distance the slowest cars in a straight line. This is actually very interesting, and what it tells me is that they have a more loaded rear wing than the rest of the competition, and if it does rain on Sunday, like it may do, then we could potentially see them having a big surprise. The fastest cars though in a straight line were Aston Martin and Mercedes, who have gone the opposite way to Williams, and you can see that as the top speed by Williams was only 332 km per hour for Carlos Sainz, whereas Aston Martin hit 341 km per hour in a straight line. That is a pretty big difference between them, and this could potentially mean that if the race is dry, that Williams will be vulnerable to easily being overtaken in the Grand Prix. That is, of course, if it is dry. Kind of like it was for McLaren at Monza, when Max Verstappen overtook Lando Norris with ease because Verstappen had a lot less downforce on his car compared to the McLaren cars. Speaking of Williams though, let's talk about them now, and Carlos Sainz specifically, because Sainz had an unbelievable performance sticking the Williams in P2, and honestly, it's not just Sainz who had a stunning performance, as Liam Lawson in the Racing Bulls is P3, and Isaac Hadjar is in P8 as well. For Williams, it is a bit of a double-edged sword though. Sainz did do amazing, but Alex Albon hit the wall very early in qualifying, and therefore will be starting right at the back of the field. But for Sainz though, let's compare his lap to Liam Lawson to see how they compared. And when you take a look at these two laps, you can see exactly what I meant by Williams being very slow in a straight line. At the end of the pit straight, for example, Liam Lawson had a 9 km per hour speed advantage over Carlos Sainz. On the track dominance, down all of the straights, it is advantage Liam Lawson and Racing Bulls. But look at the corners. When it comes to the corners, Sainz in the Williams is much faster. For example, at turn 15 in the braking zone, Sainz can just brake later than Lawson, and he has the confidence that he can get it stopped and will not hit the wall like we've seen many other drivers do in the past. It is at that corner where really the damage is done. But then as they head back towards the line, Liam Lawson with that straight line speed advantage does come back at Carlos. if the race is wet, then I really do think Carlos Sainz could be in a fantastic place to potentially get a podium. If the race is dry though, I fear he might be swallowed up due to having a little bit too much downforce on the car. I just want to say, if you are enjoying the video so far, then I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button and subscribe for more F1 content. And when you finish with this video, please remember to check out Crash Happy. But for now, let's get back to the video and let's talk about Red Bull. For Red Bull then, it was pole position for Max Verstappen, as Max at the last moment capitalised on McLaren falling away due to making mistakes, and Max took pole position by a very healthy margin. But how did Max take pole by almost half a second? Well, let's compare his lap to Carlos Sainz in the Williams, and when you take a look at these two laps, you can see how Max and the Red Bull were just able to carry more minimum apex speed at pretty much all of the 90-degree corners early on in the lap, showing how Red Bull have really progressed when it comes to lower speed corners and balance at these 90-degree corners, which is where they were so weak earlier in the season. At the exits of turns 2, 3 and 4, Verstappen carries more speed and opens out the advantage very early on. Sainz does come back at a couple of the corners, but overall it's advantage Verstappen. Going into this race, it should be Max looking very, very strong to win the Grand Prix, especially if it is dry. And who knows, with McLaren starting so far down the order, Verstappen could do a healthy damage to Piastri and Norris when it comes to the Drivers' Championship, especially if this is the beginning of McLaren starting to maybe fall away slightly. For Mercedes then, it is a very important qualifying session for Kimi Antonelli, and it is a session which could have given him a much needed confidence boost. Teammate George was close, but he was just beaten by his teammate for the first time in quite a while. Now, I would really like to compare the laps of Antonelli and George Russell, but for some reason I can't get the lap data to load, so sadly we are going to have to move on. But for the Grand Prix, I really hope Antonelli can keep the pace up. If he can, it might just give him that confidence that he needs to get some more performance out of his Mercedes and potentially save his season a little bit. For Ferrari then, it was a qualifying session that started out looking pretty good, until it really didn't. In Q2, Lewis Hamilton went out after using the soft tyres for his final lap, and he couldn't really find the performance that he needed. Meanwhile, teammate Charles Leclerc did make it through to Q3, and was looking good for potentially a top 5 start. But on his first push lap in Q3, Leclerc went in too deep and hit the wall, bringing out the first red flag of Q3. And that now means that he finds himself in P10 with teammate Lewis Hamilton in P12. And they are both in the firing line for a lap 1 incident. But now, how did Leclerc eliminate teammate Hamilton in Q2? Well, let's compare the fastest lap of Charles Leclerc from Q2 to that of Lewis Hamilton. And when you take a look at these two laps, it does actually start off pretty good for Lewis Hamilton. But as we saw earlier in the season, when it came to the C6 tyres, they started to lose their best performance about halfway around the lap. And from turn 7 onwards, it becomes advantage Charles Leclerc. He is able to carry more speed at most of the corners. As you can see, he peaks slightly higher at most of the corner entries, showing that he is carrying a little bit more speed into the corners. The advantage of the medium tyres was so much so that Charles Leclerc ended up beating Lewis Hamilton by 0.6 of a second. In the end though, it didn't really matter, as Charles Leclerc hit the wall and brought his qualifying to a very early end. Heading into the Grand Prix, Ferrari really need to try and hope that they can keep their noses clean, as they have thrown away a golden opportunity to score some good points. And finally, for McLaren then, it was a bit of a disaster qualifying session. In Monza, we heard about swapping the cars because that was the fair thing to do. And at Baku, I guess Norris threw away a good result in Q3 because it was the fair thing to do after Oscar Piastri crashed. Because Norris in Q3 threw away a golden opportunity to start a long way ahead of Oscar Piastri and make it very easy to take the lead in the Drivers' Championship. Let's now compare the lap of Lando Norris in Q3 to Max Verstappen so we can see just where it all went away for Lando Norris. Initially, it was actually advantage McLaren as Lando Norris got a great exit from the first couple of corners. But from turn 4 onwards, Max just started to get better exits and used that to his advantage to build up the gap to Lando Norris. Then at turn 15, Lando Norris, as we saw on the world feed, clipped the wall and lost a whole chunk of time, which really did put the final nail in the coffin for McLaren during this qualifying session. In the Grand Prix itself, I expect Oscar Piastri and Lando Norris to come through the field, but it is not going to be easy, especially due to their lower top speed that I showed you earlier on, but the car advantage that they generally have should help them get at least one of their cars through the podium. But I don't think we will see both of their cars on the podium. So with that in mind then, what are my final predictions for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix? Well, in P6, and yeah, for once I'm going to go on about P6, but in P6 I'm going to go for Kimi Antonelli in the Mercedes. P5 I think will be Carlos Sainz in the Williams, because I don't think he's going to have the race pace to survive against the fastest cars in the field. P4 will be Oscar Piastri in the McLaren. P3 will be Lando Norris in the McLaren. P2 will be George Russell in the Mercedes. And I'm going to go for Max Verstappen to make it back-to-back wins. But those are my thoughts. The question is, what do you guys think will happen? In the comment section down below, please do let me know. And as always, comment, leave a like and subscribe for more F1 content. And of course, please remember to check out Crash Happy. Thank you all so much for watching.